Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. We are rummaging through the Narcissist Bag of Tricks, and I'm once again referencing the book by Robert D. Hare, PhD, called Without Conscience: The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us. In this Cluster B creature's bag of tricks, the next part of their personality, a lack of remorse or guilt. These types of creatures show a stunning lack of concern for the devastating effects that their behaviors have upon others. Sometimes, which I've mentioned before, typically after the devaluation and discard, after you've seen more than you're supposed to see or figured out more than you're supposed to figure out, sometimes, as he's mentioning here, they will be completely forthright about the matter, and they'll calmly state to you they don't have any sense of guilt. They're not sorry for any of the pain or destruction that they've caused you, and there's no reason for them to be concerned. To hear such a thing from someone you thought you were close to and had deep feelings for in many cases, that can be incomprehensible. To hear someone say after, let's say, you've built this relationship up for all this time, that, oh, you never mattered to me. Which I don't think they'd necessarily say, like he says in this book, like, I don't feel guilt. They would normally say it without saying it directly. Like, well, I know that I left you stranded there for 24 hours, but I had other things to worry about. I mean, that would pretty much speak for no sense of guilt and show that they're not sorry for this pain and destruction that they may have caused you. If he had any regrets about stabbing a robbery victim who subsequently spent 3 months in the hospital as a result of the wounds, one of Robert Hare's subjects, which would be inmates, replied,
"Get real! He spends a few months in a hospital and I rot here in jail. I cut him up a bit. If I wanted to kill him, I would have slit his throat. That's the kind of guy I am. I gave him a break."
Asked if he regretted any of his crimes, his response was,
"I don't regret nothing. What's done is done. There must have been a reason why I did it at the time, and that's why it was done."
Before his execution, famous serial killer named Ted Bundy spoke directly of guilt in several interviews with Stephen McCaud and Hugh Ainsworth. He said,
"Whatever I've done in the past, you know, the emotion, omission, or commission doesn't bother me. Try to touch the past. Try to deal with the past. It isn't real. It's just a dream."
Bundy's dream contained his murders of as many as 100 young ladies. Not only had he walked away from his past, but he also extinguished the future of each of these young victims he pursued, one by one.
"Guilt,"
he remarked in prison,
"it's the mechanism we use to control people. It's an illusion. It's a kind of social control mechanism, and it's very unhealthy. It does terrible things to our bodies, and there are much better ways to control our behavior than rather extraordinary use of guilt."
On the other hand, these creatures sometimes verbalize remorse, but then, which I've seen, they'll contradict themselves in their future behaviors or actions. Criminals in prison learn very quickly that remorse is one of those words that they need to keep in mind. So when one young inmate said,
"Yeah, I feel remorse,"
once he was pressed further, he then said,
"Well, I didn't feel badly inside about it."
The author was once dumbfounded by the logic of another inmate who described his murder victim as having benefited from the crime by learning, quote,
"A hard lesson about life."
And he said
The guy only had himself to blame.
Another inmate said of the man he'd murdered in an argument about paying a bar tab,
"Anybody could have seen that I was in a horrible mood that night. What did he want to go and bother me for?"
The man continued, "Anyway, the guy never suffered. Knife wounds to the artery is the easiest way to go." These creatures' lack of remorse or guilt is associated with the remarkable ability to rationalize their behavior and to shrug off any type of personal responsibility for their actions that cause shock and disappointment to other people's families, friends, associates, and others who have played by the rules. Usually they have a handy excuse for their behavior, and in some cases they'll just deny that whatever happened happened at all, such as using techniques memory loss, blackouts, amnesia, multiple personality, temporary insanity, prop up constantly in interrogations of these types of creatures. For example, a well-publicized clip of film from a PBS special shows Kenneth Bianchi, who's one of the infamous hillside stranglers of Los Angeles, in a pathetic and transparent pantomime of a case of multiple personality, which is now called dissociative identity disorder. Although sometimes one of these creatures will admit to having performed the actions, if they do, which I've heard this one, they will greatly minimize or even deny the consequences to others that resulted from this behavior. One of his inmates with a very high score on that psychopathy checklist said that his crimes actually had a positive effect on the victims. He'd say, quote, "The next day I'd get the newspaper and read about a caper I'd pulled, a robbery or a rape. There'd be interviews with the victims. They'd say nice things about me, that I was very polite and considerate, very meticulous. I wasn't abusive to them, you understand. Some of them thanked me." Another subject which was up for breaking and entering for the 20th time had said,
"Yeah, I stole some stuff. But hey, those folks are insured up the kazoo. Nobody got hurt. No one suffered. What's the big deal? In fact, I'm doing them a favor by giving them a chance to collect their insurance money. They'll put in for more than that junk is worth, you know. They always do."
In an ironic twist, these creatures frequently see themselves as the real victims, which I've seen.
I was made a blank hole and a scapegoat. When I look back, I see myself more as a victim than a perpetrator.
So said John Wayne Gacy, that clown. He was a psychopathic serial killer who tortured and murdered 33 young men and boys and buried their carcasses in the basement of his house. While discussing these murders, this man, Gacy, portrayed himself as the 34th victim.
I was the victim. I was cheated out of my childhood,
he said. He wondered to himself if there would be someone somewhere who would understand how badly it had hurt to be John Wayne Gacy. In a book about Kenneth Taylor, the dentist who severely beat his wife on their honeymoon, cheated on her, and later battered her to death, Peter Moss quoted him as saying, quote,
"I loved her so deeply. I miss her so much. What happened was a tragedy. I lost my best lover, my best friend. Why doesn't anybody understand what I've been going through?"
In this book, he's talking only about psychopaths, but as we've stated before, there are many overlapping characteristics among the different cluster B types. His examples are all regarding crimes. Other ways you can see these behaviors and actions: when you meet a person, you both discuss, like I've said before, honesty, how important it is, and then the very person who told you, "Oh yeah, I'm very honest," you catch them in horrible lies. Let's say you are a person who values honesty. You know what that means, which sometimes means if the truth is ugly, you still have to tell it. But these people aren't doing that. Your brain can't comprehend how a person who thinks honesty is important could then turn around and give such a horribly false story, because we're assuming it's a really big deal. When you confront such a person, that's when you'll see this lack of remorse or guilt. They won't say the words usually. Another way this can look in a relationship setting, for example, let's say you're a recently divorced lady who discovered your husband had been having an affair with his secretary for the last 6-7 months. The only reason it stopped was because you happened to follow him one night and caught him in the act. You've divorced from him, and let's say it was a very traumatic experience for you, because you had urges to run off with this man or that man, but you told yourself with your morality that I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't want my husband doing that. He loves me, so I'm not going to do it. Sorry, thanks for the compliment, but I'm taken. Something like that. Let's say that after the divorce, you're devastated and distrustful of men. Another man steps along, fancies you, and flirts with you. You may be burned so badly you're not interested. So you may just say, thanks, but I don't date, or something like that. Some of these can be very persistent. So let's say this love bombing and the idealization comes up, which you wouldn't know usually at this point when it's happening. You just think it's a nice person. It says, I know how you feel and I understand that, and I believe that's a horrible thing you went through, but let me show you that people aren't all bad. Someone who says lines like that and then proceeds to be persistent repeatedly, and you think to yourself, you know, I should give this person a chance. it's not fair, it's not his fault that my spouse did that, and you might go ahead and go through with it, only to find that the closer and closer you get, you eventually learn that this man, too, has been pursuing candy cantaloupes down the street at the Shady Lady every single Friday for the past several months. That is going to be a devastating blow for you because you weren't wanting to get involved to begin with, but this person urged you that, oh, it's safe with me, and you went through with it and then discovered it's doing the same thing the spouse did. A person who would do that, knowing your position, knowing, let's say, for weeks and months you were standoff-ish and you were rejecting for dates, and then maybe one day you reach a point internally and think, you know what, I'll give this person a chance. And you do it somewhat against your will, but maybe a friend or a family member says, you got to get out there again, give someone a chance, and you decide to, maybe against your better judgment, go ahead and say, okay, I'll do it. And then, of course, it escalates to what we just discussed. That can be double devastating, to think that the person who was saying all those wonderful things about how, I'll show you that I'm different from your husband who treated you wrong, no one should ever treat you wrong, and everything sounds like music to your ears and you went along with it, only to discover the truth. That's a person that doesn't have guilt or remorse. And if you were to escape from such a person and then see them again, chances are they would be just like, hey, how are you? And like everything's just great. And you'll be thinking, it took me years to get over you and your horrendous ways. And you're just going to come up like everything's fine. And then, of course, if you said that, you'd probably be said, oh, don't be a spoilsport. That's the past. Oh, what are you doing? Let's get together. Like nothing happened. Even if you say, I was really hurt by what you did, they'd probably say something like, well, get over it, that's over with. Oh, so what? I did it because of blah, blah, blah. Another example of this lack of guilt or remorse, you have a dog that you love, and you have a friend who agrees to dog sit for you. And let's say the friend lets the door open so the dog could run out in the street and get smashed, and this friend knows how much you love this dog. This person caused the dog's death somehow, would likely scrape up the carcass, take it away somewhere, throw it in the trash, and this same person would be telling you every day, oh, the dog's great, the dog's fine, on the phone, of course knowing that you're going to come back and find that dog gone. You come back from being out of town, and this person comes up with some kind of convenient lie, like, oh, someone broke in the house, and the door was open, and I looked and the dog was gone. Oh, I've looked everywhere. Again, these are examples where horrendous things are done that you would never consider doing to anybody, yet this person did it after telling you how sincere they are, and that's what it can look like in a relationship setting, whether it's a romantic or even just a friendship. An interesting aspect, though, of this lack of remorse or guilt is that it displays how these creatures are kind of like a one-sided monster. Everything is revolving around them. For example, if this creature happens to have a pet that it likes, it probably doesn't love it, but it serves a purpose for it, just like everybody else in its life. And if someone were to let this person's pet out loose to run away, or were to harm this pet in some way, you better believe that this creature will be furious. This person will think it was awful that you would do, or whoever would do such a thing to their beloved pet. However, that same mentality is switched off when they're doing whatever they're doing that is inappropriate and harm-causing. It's that entitlement thing we've covered in other videos, that they feel, well, for me it's okay if I want to destroy someone's property or pet, but they better not do it to me, because they didn't ever get that lesson that if you treat others nicely, then they treat you nicely, you all get along in harmony. But these people are disordered, so they think that they can get by only expecting themselves to be treated properly and not be betrayed or acted against, yet they see no harm in doing that to somebody else because they'll just cover it all up and just pretend like they didn't do it. They don't see the whole picture, that they need to behave appropriately towards others, and others are supposed to behave the same towards them. But they think they can cheat the system, and that they can appear to be respecting their peers while doing horrible things behind their back, and then expecting you, being their friend or partner, to give them the respect they feel they deserve. Even if it's uncovered later that they did something horrific, it'll be just, oh, so what? And you'll think, that doesn't fit the person that I knew because they were fake. So beware.
I am the Narcopath.
And big deal. So what? You found out that the new person I was with just so happened to be that cashier who worked at the grocery store down the street that you always accused me of flirting with. That also, as I pointed out, flirted with me, and I didn't find him interesting.
And then weren't you shocked to see this resulted in me leaving you for him? Well, you must know, he and I had been seeing each other for quite a while before you ever even noticed him. In fact, at first, we agreed to be discreet. He wouldn't even pay attention to me, and I would deliberately avoid his line anytime you and I were together. Well, later, I decided to change my game plan, my strategy. So that's why we started seeing him, and that's when you started to think it started to begin. Well, honey, the joke is on you because I was prepared to marry this new person once I found out that your trust fund was stripped down to zero. I couldn't work with that. I needed breast implants. I needed facial reconstruction. I needed new hair. I couldn't live off of your measly nothing income. This one, though it was just a cashier, I found out he's also a multimillionaire once he turns 30. I happened to see the paperwork, so once that comes, all I have to do is keep him going, and I will get what I want. And ta-ta to you.
You should have been more rich. You could have kept me. Too bad for you.
Hi, sweetie. Oh, hi. I'm Sandy Hope's Tart. This is my real creature. Not sure what it is yet. She sure is sweet. Suckle some milk. Oh. I'm Sandy Hope Start. Welcome back to Channel 5 Fake News. Only our news is real.
I am the Narcopath.